See, I'm starting my timer.
Oh, good. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Right Stuff. I am Josh Hayes here with my buddy Scott Moon right over there. And today we're talking about subplot and main plot on the show. It's episode 7. Welcome.
Yep. Good to see everybody here. Well, everybody that's going to eventually listen to it. Right now, it's just you and me.
Like the onslaught of audience members right now is...
Don't rush. Hey, back. Everybody stay back.
Everybody, take your time, raise your hands.
Yeah.
If you brought a snack, make sure you brought a snack for the rest of the class.
Right.
Well, if you're listening live or watching live, as the case may be, we just did a show. If you're watching or listening in the feed or following on the podcast, this show is going to be a couple days after episode 6. We talked a little bit about what's going on in our lives last episode. Scott, do you have anything going on that you didn't talk about a couple minutes ago?
Let's see. Wow. I probably use it all. Last night I woke up several times because that's what I do. But and I was thinking, I'll start telling myself stories in my head. I'm like, oh, this would be great to talk about. Well, actually, I'd wake up and I'd think, okay, well, I don't really do a lot of pre-planning for the shows. We got our topics, and I'm like, okay, so I better start thinking of some examples of subplots. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have total brain freeze and be like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm thinking about subplots and trying to remember stories I like with subplots. And then I start telling stories about things that happen, to different things. So, okay. One of the things, and this isn't really a story, but on the way back from the Smarter Artist show, I drove from Austin up into Kansas, and there must have been 30 or 40 cars stranded alongside of the road, and like nicer cars, newer cars. And, I was getting kind of paranoid as I was driving because I was like, what is on the road that has all these cars getting flat tires? And some of them were abandoned, and I wondered if they got arrested and maybe they left the car there, legally parked.
Mass arrests in Texas.
Because they were almost all Texas cars going to Kansas. But there was just a lot. And so I just knew I was going to get some flat tires and whatnot. But other than that, the trip back from Austin was really good. On the way down there, I used 4 tanks of gas because I was going into the wind, and my vehicle's kind of square. But then on the way back, I used 2. So I was cruising on the way back.
The wind was pushy. You should have put up a sail. Then you might not have to use any gas.
I know. Like a solar sail if we're going to do science fiction. You could really move that.
I'm pretty sure you might have been going too fast at that point.
Yeah, light speed.
Speeding ticket.
Yeah. We were talking about Star Trek in the last episode, so we can do some warp drive stuff there. That would have been pretty handy. Although I did, I listened to a lot of Get Your Son Ready. Brandon Sanderson.
Got it. Brandon Sanderson Fanboy Club.
In the Final Empire, yeah. On the way down there. But on the way back, I was thinking about the conference a lot and making lots of notes. I hold my phone up while I'm driving and make some voice dictation, and I plotted out a bunch of a story because since I have 47, now 48 story projects started, I should obviously start one more.
I mean, really, I think you're kind of underhanding yourself because you should have at least 8 more, at least.
Yeah. I'll work on that. Maybe by the next show, I should have 8 more.
Unacceptable.
8 more story ideas. Look, it was like what in one of
They all need to be specifically different genres.
Right. Yeah, different genres, different points of view, different age groups. Since Stephen King in On Writing, I'm sure most of the people that are going to watch this have probably listened to that, but he talks about ideas because people always come to you when you're a writer. I got this great idea for a best-selling novel, and you're like, yeah. Ideas are not really that big a deal. I got like hundreds of them. I had 6 of them that I forgot before I could write them down. Or like what's the best example is you never go to your brain surgeon friend and say, hey man, I got a great idea for brain surgery. All I got to do is go to medical school.
Right.
And I'm going to start cutting people's heads open.
Yeah.
So,
anyway, got a great idea for a story.
Yeah.
You know what kills me is having a good idea for a story when you're laying in bed and then you're like, that is such a good idea. I'm going to remember that in the morning.
I see what this
I'm tired. I'm not going to write it down. But I'll remember it because it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
And then you go to bed and you wake up the next morning and you're like, what was that good idea? You remember that you had a good idea, but you can't remember what that idea was.
There was a writer that I can't remember. I wish I could remember who said that. I think it might have been Terry Brooks. From the Sword of Shannara and a lot of the Star Wars novelizations. I think that I read something that he said that he didn't write those things down, and that if it was a good enough idea, it would survive on its own. Which, now having written some down, I've looked at him in the morning and gone, that's not a good idea.
What the hell is a purple panther chasing a rabbit? I don't know.
Yeah, that was cheesy. But so
9 times out of 10, I'll get out my phone and write a note on my phone. And what's funny is we were talking about story beats last night or last episode, and talking about writing the narrative and getting stuck. There were several times where I was sitting at 11 o'clock at night, typing away, and then I get stuck on a part. And I sit at the screen and look at it, and I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do. And then I'm like, God, I'm so tired. All right, I'm going to go to bed. So I save my project, go and lay in bed, get my book. I get like 3 lines into the book, and I'm like, that's exactly how I'm going to fix that. Why did I not think about it 5 minutes ago when I was sitting in front of my computer? So I grab my phone, jot down some notes, and I'm like, okay, got it down, and now I can go to bed. And then I get up the next morning and add it into my story.
Yeah.
So, the moral of that story is always keep a notebook or a phone next to you while you're sleeping, and don't expect yourself to remember it in the morning.
Yeah. I know if I turn on my phone to make a note like that, I'd probably wake up the better half, and she'd be like, "What are you doing? You're waking me up."
It's either that or a notebook, and I can't write. I don't have night vision, so if I have my notebook, I've got to turn on my lamp. I've got to find my pen, and then you got to write it all out, and then like, what are you doing over there? Stop it! It's bedtime. If I get my phone, I don't need night vision. The only thing
these are problems that spouses of writers have. Yes. You're always writing. You're always distracted. Always head in the clouds. That's what we get paid for.
Head in the clouds, thinking about what your next story is going to be about, which leads right into
subplots.
Today, our episode of Subplots and Main Plots. God, that was such a fantastic segue.
Every now and then, lightning strikes. Bow! You got it.
So we're talking about subplots and main plots. And for those of you on the feed on Blab, James, I see you're calling in. We'll get you on here in a second. So they're, according to Christopher Booker, who's read a pretty well-known book about plots, is that there are 7 basic ones, and that's overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy. Tragedy.
I'm going to write one about tragedy. Tragedy is the name of my next book.
Yeah, and rebirth. And he says that those are the 7 over umbrella plots that everything is based on, and obviously there's a lot of other smaller ones. Is there an idea that you can think of one of your books, Scott, that you can pull out one of those 7, or what pops into your mind? Let's talk about weapons, since that's the one you're writing right now.
As far as the overall plot,
what type of plot does weapons fall into?
Oh man, it's tough. See, now you're gonna make me actually think about it and analyze it. I'm gonna stagger and stumble answering this question because I fall back to my panster roots, which I did for 30 some years before I got started. But it's going to be a conflict story. It's going to be a resolution story because it's the end of a trilogy. Weapons of Earth. Basically, it's going to tie everything together as far as, so it's going to be. Oh, see, I can't remember all the ones you just listed, but
so you think it'd be a quest?
It's
a quest or a rebirth, maybe.
Probably a rebirth. It's going to be a rebirth, definitely, because part of the story involves Ken Rowland. If you're familiar with my trilogy, my Ken Rowland trilogy, is that his problems all started on a planet called Hell's Breach, where he refused to commit genocide and wipe out a bunch of monsters called Reapers. and then everybody hates him after that, including his fleet that he fought for, and then the Reapers, of course, don't like him because he did a lot of damage in their planet. Well, in book 3, guess what? Everything's going to wind up back on Hell's Breach.
So let me read you the definition for rebirth according to Booker.
Okay.
Rebirth is during the course of the story, an important event forces the main character to change their ways, often making them a better person. Does that fit Ken Rowland? Or let's say it could be the quest where it's the protagonist and some companions set out to acquire an important object or get to a location facing many obstacles or temptations along the way.
Everything about the Ken Rowland Chronicles is kind of a rebirth because he's got this big question that he's trying to answer is, did I do the right thing in not taking out this horrible enemy of humankind and whatnot or whatever.
Oh, very good.
And there's a little bit of a character rebirth because there's some characters that he's going to encounter, of course, that got left behind on Hell's Breach, and they're kind of badass and fun to write about. So, how about you?
Well,
I can't plot.
Let's see. We've kind of identified the main plot to Weapons. Do you have any subplots?
Yeah, there's a couple of subplots. One of the subplots is a hangover or carryover from book 2, Son of Orlon. And it's the shapeshifter. Without doing tons of spoilers and stuff, there's a strong amount of shapeshifter, not espionage. Basically, some of the people in the books are shapeshifters, and the shapeshifters are a race of people that have kind of been used to be spies, assassins, and prostitutes. They kind of are, there you go. And they're really good at it. They're shapeshifters. They can be anybody. They're good at fantasy fulfillment. But they are going to, it's kind of like Rise of the Shapeshifters might be a subtitle for this because they have a lot of issues in the subplot where Ken Rowland has to deal with them and how they confuse everything about the final resolution. So it's a subplot.
Excellent. Well, you asked me about mine. Mine, I think, is more overcoming the monster than anything. The monster being Hook. For those of you who don't know, my series that I'm writing right now is called Second Star, and it is a science fiction version of Peter Pan, where for most of the book, Peter Pan is the bad guy, and we have these heroes that are taken straight out of the book. Wendy and Michael and John and Pan and Tinkerbell, Hook, and all that stuff. The names are tweaked a little bit, and the setting is tweaked a little bit, but it's basically an overcoming the monster where they're fighting Hook and trying to overcome the Regency there. Some of the subplots in the book are right now in book 3, they're trying to find somebody to help them. And so they're going on a quest to find these people called the Relevance that are going to help them in their fight against the Regency or Hook. I don't have any romance or anything like that in my book. There is some in the third book. There's half of the book is written in the current timeline of the series, and then half of the book is written in basically what amounts to the past of that series. And there is a little bit of romance, but not a whole lot. There's just a hint of
suggestions, which apparently from some of my research, these that a lot of, it seems like on the surface of it that maybe some of the science fiction crowd doesn't like the romantic subplots.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and if it's done right, I don't really have a big issue with it. I mean, as long as it's not if it's done just to show two characters getting together, I think it's kind of not really the genre, but I mean, it's got to advance the story. Right.
Science fiction is pretty plot driven generally.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you don't let that romance take over the story, then I think you'd be okay with putting it in there for a science fiction story anyway.
I actually do, now that you mention it, and I don't know why I didn't think of this before, as far as subplots, talking about how science fiction audiences may or may not like the romantic subplots. One of my subplots from the beginning has been Ken Rowland and Laura Keene and Rebecca LaCroix, and because he was in love with Rebecca or whatever a long time ago, and of course separated by all the stories. Well, he's been trapped on this planet with Laura, and so, but then of course Rebecca comes back, so now he's kind of caught between on who he spends his attention on and how they react to him, and both of them they don't take any crap from him, right? So, but that's actually getting to be more and more of a subplot, and it causes some conflict, if nothing else, in what they're doing in the story.
Absolutely.
So,
well, I'm not sure where James went. I was getting ready to bring
James
him in.
Is back.
Oh, there he is.
There
he came back.
James, right on time. That was eerie because you're like, I'm not sure where James is, and boom, he's back like magic.
Right back into the show.
Like a star.
For those of you who don't know, we haven't had any guests on the show. James was our first guest in our last episode talking about story beating. We're going to get him in here again, and we're going to talk about some plots and subplots.
So whenever you want to call in James up, there you are.
I got him.
Welcome, hey, James.
Welcome back.
My router went down.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like us. We have some technical difficulties. I almost think sometimes it's like there's some sort of weird little gremlin someplace. It's like, well, let's roll the wheel of technical difficulties because
let's screw with these guys. Yeah, my computer has what I call an urgent need detector. It detects when I have an urgent need to use, and it'll go down on me.
Yeah,
I think that's the demons of Blab saying you guys aren't allowed to have this show. We're going to shut you down.
The worst one was 3 episodes ago now when I was down in Texas, and I was trying to use my computer and it wouldn't work, and then I used my phone and my phone overheated, and I went back to the computer and I had a slow internet connection, and then we had the mysterious Cylon voice in the last episode. So it's good everything's working now.
I really hope that's going to show up in the audio because I want to hear what it sounds like because I couldn't hear it at all.
Yeah, because otherwise people are going to be going, what are they talking about?
What are they talking about?
There's no weird sound. Those guys are dorks.
It was really strange. Yeah.
He doesn't sound like Locutus at all. That's a horrible, horrible revision.
Not a Borg. Just definitely not. So
okay.
So we're talking about plots and subplots today. James, you are the chief executive editor of the Star Trek Anthology. I think that's what you told us the last time.
Producer. Yeah, chief
producer. Producer. Okay. So in your anthology, is this like something where you guys put together short stories for Star Trek? Or I'm looking on your page here, and I'm not. Obviously, if I had more time, I'd.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Well, in a nutshell, it's we've got 3 anchor shows.
Okay.
You've got Starship Challenger, Assignment Earth, and something new and original called Mother. And each of them are very unique. Challenger is about Captain J.M. Colt. Do you remember the original pilot for Star Trek? The original Star Trek?
The Menagerie?
The Cage, actually. With Captain Pike, and he had a cute little red-haired yeoman with a ponytail.
I don't remember that at all.
I should remember that because
you
were like 30 when that came out, Scott.
Well, she's grown up and climbed up through the ranks and made her way to captain, and she's been through some rough times. It's almost like she has this curse following her, where every ship she serves on, either the ship is lost, or the crew is lost, or the captain is killed. And she's gotten this reputation of being kind of.
That would make you unpopular. Yeah, that would make you unpopular.
Kind of. So her latest, and she's avoided becoming a captain because she's really worried about what that'll mean. She's got this thing going on in her head. It's kind of a PTSD story, and that's kind of the subplot to the that's the B plot that runs through as a thread through every episode we're going to do with Challenger, is her suffering with PTSD. and
Right.
And
I'm getting some lock up here. Can you hear, Josh?
I maybe his router went down again.
Oh, I was just getting interested. Dang it.
That's the evil blab demon.
That's definitely some sort of anti-Star Trek conspiracy on our computers here inside. So he's talking about that as being a subplot, and it made me think that a subplot is often kind of a tension builder.
And how she's handling
to kind of keep the tension up without like constantly just jamming the main plot down your throat every scene and stuff. So the subplots are a good way to do that.
He mentioned PTSD as being a subplot, which that's interesting because when you think of that, PTSD is when you first think of it, it's an idea or it's a thing that's going to happen. But when you think of it as a subplot, then it actually brings a lot to the story as a subplot dealing with how's the character going to deal with that. And
I think a lot of your internal or your character struggles could be subplots on some level.
Yes.
Something they're struggling against, like your main character might be trying to save, let's say in Die Hard, Bruce Willis is trying to save Nakatomi Plaza, but then his subplot is, his relationship with his wife. And that's more of a personal thing. Right. So it's a subplot.
I have to say, when we're talking about subplots and plots, whether they affect the story or not, with James mentioning a Star Trek deal, and he mentioned last episode too, in the new Star Trek, when you're talking about the new Spock and the new Uhura, right. They have a romance in the new. I want to say the new Wrath of Khan because Into Darkness. I'm going to call it the new Wrath of Khan because that's what it is. If you guys are arguing with me, then your arguments are invalid here. It's Khan 2, Star Trek Khan Returns.
Khan 2. Gotcha.
That whole
I think in Hollywood they have, because in a movie, I was reading about doing screenplays at one time, is they have a package, and the package might be 3 famous actors, a script by a famous writer, and this special effects bonanza, and you put that all together and you got this package or whatever they call it, and then they say, okay, we're going to go ahead and produce it. Well, I think they've got a checklist, and somebody says, well, we need a hot romance in this or else it's not going to do good in theater. So I think Spock needs to have a girlfriend and Uhura needs to have a boyfriend, so let's put them together. That sounds like a great idea.
And you're right, but it seemed a little forced. I don't know if you thought the same thing as I did, but it seemed a little forced, and maybe it's just because we did.
I never imagined Spock. I've never watched a Star Trek. I thought, I wonder who Spock's girlfriend is. Well, he's got a pretty active dating life.
But see, that's the thing: is romance is not Spock's character. No. It never once in the history of Star Trek, whether it's Spock in TNG or Spock in the movies or Spock in the original series, I don't think we've ever seen romance as a plot device for Spock. That
maybe
wasn't
for
just
Captain Kirk or something like that, or some of the other characters.
I think when with Khan 2, they were trying so much to
trying to humanize him a little bit, which was he's only half human,
but he's not human. Yeah,
I know. What the hell?
So I don't know. I'm not completely against romance, but make it relevant.
When I was trying to get some ideas, because usually we just kind of wing it. We get a general idea and we talk and kind of let the subconscious come out as to what we're talking about. But this morning I'd Googled some things on subplots, and I came up with the Great Gatsby Prohibition subplot, Lord of the Rings subplots, but then the random ones, there was one like the most random science fiction subplots in movies, and almost all of them involved romance.
Right.
So we had Spock and Uhura. We had Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke and Gattaca. Their romance, some of the people on that. Movie. Yeah, and a lot of people on the blog there that I found thought that was unnecessary. And then Thor and Jane Foster in the Thor movie.
Oh, yes. Good one.
But and then a couple of other ones like that. So I don't know. I mean, I think subplot's got to do a job. It's like there's no free seats in a good story.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if you're going to have since we're talking about romance, if you're going to have a romantic subplot or a romantic idea in your story, make it relevant to the plot, especially if you're not reading a romance novel. I don't think I've ever jumped into a sci-fi book going, "Oh God, I hope there's a good romance subplot in here."
And it could be. I mean, I wouldn't mind that. I like reading romance, to a certain extent. But yeah, you wouldn't take
you like reading active erotica,
active romance. That was in a smarter artist. I see. Now you got me doing it. Now I'm trying to remember his name. Dang it, Cowboy guy. Lefebvre, he was talking about, he's from Canada, and he was talking about that, and he says, the active romance, which is, code for erotica. But then
isn't that nice to come back to is erotica.
Yeah, we're talking about...
we've completely gone away from Star Trek, and now we're talking about erotica. Welcome back, James.
There was
we're talking about romance and whether or not it has a place in science fiction. We just actually finished talking about Uhura and Spock in Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan 2, which is how we're going to call in this.
Thought you'd like that. So.
And I'm going to bring my sign into play here because I am going to bring up a incident in fiction where romance was used in science fiction and fantasy, and it actually pushed the plot forward, and that was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson.
Every show's got to have a little Brandon Sanderson in there.
In Mistborn, The Final Empire with Vin and Elend, in that romantic subplot,
it did serve the story.
It does serve the story, and it is necessary to have it in there because if it's not in there, you can't have book 2, and book 3. And there's a lot of incidents that happen in the subsequent books that if the romantic subplot of book 1 was not there, the impact of those scenes would be nothing. That you just read them and you're like, okay, that makes no sense. I don't know why you put that in there, but because of the romantic subplot.
When you have critical elements for each of your characters that gives some emotional buoyancy and some motivation to the character, absolutely, it's important to move the plot forward.
Maybe a romantic subplot could force the characters to make some type of difficult choice, and that would make some good tension in the story.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the most popular subplots that I can think of, like if you're talking about the quest, a subplot of the quest could be revenge or rivalry, where the quest of the story is, overcoming some big thing, but there is a rivalry involved there, and it actually is 2 main plots rolled into one. I wonder though if of these 7 basic plots, instead of having a smaller subplot, could you just throw in a second main plot and have that main plot be the subplot in the book and have them interweave together? Yeah.
We're kind of doing that in our second episode where we've got the Challenger is sent on a deep space mission, but before they can move into unexplored territory, they have to stop to repair a subspace transmitter on this planet. Starfleet has set up this big array down on this planet. So the engineer and his young Vulcan assistant beam down, and the moment they're beaming down, the Challenger comes under an attack by people that have laid claim to this planet, that Starfleet wasn't aware that they had a claim of this planet. Mm-hmm. So when attacking the ship, they disrupt the transporter beam, and the guy's set down several miles from where they need to be, and the engineer breaks his leg. So it's up to the young Vulcan assistant to get to the device and repair it. Meanwhile, the captain takes the ship away from the planet and leads these aliens on a merry chase so that her guys can do what they need to do. So you've got all of this going on. The Vulcan has to figure out how he's going to learn very quickly what to do, because he was just supposed to come and observe the work. So he's got to make a mature decision.
God, I hate when the transporter beam messes up.
And the captain has got to get these guys away from her men and distract them long enough that they can get the job done. Mm-hmm. And what she ends up doing is she puts out a distress call to any ships in the area. So that gives us a chance to get
given her background, you said earlier, her putting out a distress call is probably going to freak people out because she's had some bad luck with her ships in the PTSD.
Yeah, it might. Well, they hurry up and get to her.
Sure.
And what's really fun about this is it gives us a chance to give a couple other fan films a cameo in our show. So, one big happy fleet kind of thing. So we bring these other guys in that each have their own production, and they each show up to assist the captain. But
so is your show, is it a I'm looking at your episodes now and I can see they're in production. Is it a video show?
It's a fan film.
Oh, okay. See that I was thinking it was going to be a short story collection, but as I'm looking through it now, I see and I understand it's
that'd be cool. No, it'll be like a TV show. It'll be like a TV show.
Excellent. And so, do you have a group of writers that write with you, or are you the primary?
Awesome. Well, I started this mess. It's all my fault.
But I've got
famous last words.
Well, I've got Bill Alexander, William Alexander, who's written a number of time travel novels. Mm-hmm. You might want to look him up. And
Bill
Anthony Burke, William Alexander. And Jessica Burke and Anthony Burge, Jessica Burge and Anthony Burke. Blah, I got it all mixed up. Burke and Burge, who
that's another one of the blab demons.
Who are both
tongue-tied.
They're both Lovecraftian writers, which is exactly the kind of thing I wanted to bring to our production because we wanted to do something weird and different. And boy, do they bring that. They're really excellent writers. And then I've got Gary Karp, who also plays our doctor. He's working on a script. And Scott J. Smith, who is my webmaster, but also a terrific writer. We've got a lot of writers, and we've got a lot of academics on my crew, which is nice because you've got this great trust of brainiacs who love to write, and we have a lot of fun doing it, and it's a nice team effort. And it's not easy to get a bunch of writers together in the room and get them all to agree on things.
No, Scott and I never agree on anything.
No.
We have our moments, but for the most part, our styles seem to be meshing pretty nice. So it's working really well, and we've got some terrific stories. And Brian, one of my executive producers, Brian Koval, wrote this wonderful standalone story about this mining survey vessel that runs into this thing, and the whole mess kind of turns the Prime Directive on its head. So yeah, we in all of our stories we try to keep an A and a B plot going. There's always this underlying thread that runs alongside the main story.
Right.
That's how life is. There's more than one thing going on in life. So to have an A and B plot is kind of important, I think.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You almost have a plot with every character you have. Every significant character almost has their own plot to a certain extent.
And that brings us to the final point I wanted to get into on the plot subplot category for today's episode is when you're doing a main plot or a subplot. You have your main POV characters sometimes, or you have your secondary characters. When you write a subplot, do you need to limit that subplot to the secondary characters, or is your subplot going to be something that your main character is doing? I like to read a lot of space opera, and so in space opera, especially my favorite author is Peter F. Hamilton, and his novels are filled with 20 characters, and every single one of those characters has several plots, and it's interesting to read because the the secondary characters, they have their own main plots, which are secondary plots in the book, but the secondary
it's kind of like your earlier question is, can you have two main plots? It's almost like a plot with another character is almost a little bit different category than a subplot because
absolutely,
you have you have subplots with the main character, it's a little bit different. But
Right.
Well,
And then,
it's all about character development, though. That's the thing, and each one of these characters is on their own path. They might
Right.
all be together on a larger path, but that path breaks down into smaller paths per character. So
absolutely. It does.
and if you don't do that, I think you do it. You do not do it at your own folly, because the more you enrich your characters, the better your story is going to be.
right, people are going to have favorite characters. Some of my favorite characters in stories I like are not always the main character.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know,
And that's also a good point to mention, because if
like
you're
I
just,
was always hoping that Spock and Uhura would get together. It's just something
you
I'm
know,
always hopeful.
I'm gonna. Is there a way to mute your mic? We're gonna mute your mic.
I'm
Scott.
sorry. I take that back. I was just being honoring.
It brings up a good point, because this is something that I came up to on a couple of my earlier writing ventures. Is you write your main character and you have this idea for the main character, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a great idea, and then by the nature of the story, you have to have secondary characters in your story, whether they're POV characters or not. And my
no man is an island. I mean, yeah. I mean, we all swirl around each other, and in doing that, you enrich your story, I think.
Well, and I think that the thing that held me up on the actual writing the story was that I'd have the main character and his plot and his goals, and then I'd have secondary characters that are thrown in there just for the sake of having secondary characters, and I did not give them plots. I did not give them goals or ideas, and so everything that they did pushed the main plot and the main character's story, and that does not make a good secondary character, and it does not make a good side plot when they're just doing whatever they do, coincidence or not, pushes the main character to the main plot. So if you have secondary characters in your story, giving them a main plot that does not necessarily coincide with your main character and his main plot will really give your story, I think, more meat and more substance.
More depth.
Well, I agree. It's like the engineer and his assistant story. The story's called A Logical Solution. You think it's going to go in one direction, and then it takes a hard left turn, and you go, "Oh, okay." The story wasn't about him.
Twist.
It was about him. Well, actually, it was about the both of them. It was okay. You know.
There's an author, Stephen James, and one of his books. Actually, his book is Story Trump Structure, but he talks about that your twist has to be surprising and inevitable at the same time, which is kind of a high thing. Yeah, but like kind of like what you're saying. That's I'm glad you stopped back in, James. Made your way back to us twice, because the first time you got kicked off.
I'm not determined.
Yeah, there you go. You got to stick to it, just kind of like we would do if we were red shirts on the Star Trek. We wouldn't just get killed.
I'm glad you guys let me shoehorn in this morning.
Yeah, no, it's great. Good to have you.
Thanks for coming on.
We're going to start tying it up. Do you have any thoughts, Josh, before we go? Because I got to go to work. Earn money.
I think this was a great show. I'll get it put up, and I'll get the show notes typed up. But 6 and 7 were today. Great shows, great guests. Thank you, James, for coming in and hanging out with us.
James. Good to meet you
again. Yeah.
Thanks everybody else who was watching and catches us on the feed later. That's about it for today. This has been The Right Stuff. I am Josh Hayes. This is Scott Moon over here. Down here is James A. Bray. He was our guest on episode 6 and 7. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next show. Take it easy, guys.
All right. Signing off. Thanks, man. See you later.